Welcome back. This is CerealSnax, and today I wanted to do kind of a spectator tutorial on Starcraft, and my first episode is going to be about just basic units and what they do. And I'm going to start with the Protoss race. That's the one I'm most familiar with, and I just want to do a brief overview of the units. I'm not going to go into much detail. I just want to kind of give you an idea of what these units are so that when you are spectating a Starcraft game, you know who they are and what they do and have some idea of their capabilities. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I know that the majority of people that watch StarCraft matches don't play StarCraft. So this should be helpful, hopefully, to get you a better understanding of the units in the game. And I may even go on and make episodes about the buildings, just certain things that you should watch out for as a spectator. I'm really not focused on giving out information for those of you playing the game, although if you do play the game and you're interested in hearing my brief overview, then by all means watch. However, it's really for those people who know nothing about StarCraft, have never watched a game, or if they've watched a game, they really don't understand some of the finer points of the units that are used. So, like I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'm going to go into enough detail, I think, that you'll be able to watch and understand the capabilities of the units that are on the field. So, obviously, the first unit is the Humble Probe, and you can see him here. All the probes do is gather minerals and gas. So if you look back down here at my base, you will see that that's what they're doing, gathering minerals and gas. This will allow you to build other units that actually use those minerals and gas. Now, the other thing they can do, of course, is to build buildings, and I'll show you that here with this probe. He can build anything that you want as long as you have the prereq to build it. So the nice thing about Protoss is they can build the building and then just kind of go on their way. They don't have to stick around. Unlike the Terran, who actually have to stay and build the building, or Zerg, when the drone actually builds the building at Zerg, they get used up and become the building. So that's about all they do. Now, in an early game, sometimes you'll see the probes being used as warriors to fend off small attacks that happen on those early rushes. They also are very critical to you winning the game and to your economy. So many players will focus on building as many probes or as drones as possible, or SCVs, early on so that they can get a head start on their economy, their minerals and gas. And ultimately, they are a very important unit to be using. So, you know, keep that in mind. That's an important unit. They also don't want to be killed off. You want them to keep this safe as possible. Many times you'll see players pull them off and move them away so as to not get them destroyed. So that's the probe. So let's move on to the next unit. And that second unit we're going to look at is the Zealot. So let's pull the Zealot out here. We'll move the probe back. Now, the Zealot is the main melee unit of the Protoss army. He has a special ability that if you train it, will allow you to charge. And let's see if I can do it against my own unit. Yep, and he charges in there. I don't want to destroy my unit, but you press it's a actual attack that he just does automatically. So when those players click on it, you'll see the Zealots charge. That makes them very formidable late game. They're a great unit to build early game, though, too, especially against early rushes, because they are relatively cheap for the player to purchase, and that enables them to have a quick defense. They're great against Zerglings and that sort of thing. They also look pretty cool. You know, they got a cool, like, ponytail thing that just hangs down like dreadlocks almost. They're very neat looking. They've got, like, these laser swords on their, or laser daggers, I guess, on their hands. They do like a dual attack kind of thing. So they're fun to watch out on the field. So that's the Zealot. We'll move him back in here. The next unit that people typically will build is the Sentry, and the Stalker. These two come about the same time. We'll look at the Sentry first. The Sentry is not a very strong unit, and it doesn't have many hit points, and it doesn't do a lot of damage. But it is great early on, especially to keep rushes from occurring. So it's great at blocking off units, and I'll show you kind of what it does. It can throw down a force field. It usually can throw down multiple force fields. The other thing it can, and this is great because it can block units that don't have a large range or are melee units like Zerglings. Keeps them from getting any closer. It can block off an entire ramp in a game. So strategic use of these sentry force fields is very critical. The other thing it has is a Guardian Shield, which protects all the units within this sphere and gives them a much reduced damage taken. So it's very helpful and almost necessary in battles to have at least one sentry performing that shield attack. So you'll see those shields pop up when they are attacked and they have sentries in their army. So that's kind of the main usage of that sentry unit. Great unit to build up early because then the energy builds up and then they can do more abilities. The next unit and one of the staple units of the Protoss is the Stalker. And the Stalker, of course, is a spidery looking thing. He's pretty neat. You can see his little head here in the middle, kind of cool. You can see his head down here in the viewport as well. They're really good at air and ground defense. So they are able to attack flying units as well as ground units, and that makes them indispensable in the Protoss army. One of their special moves is the blink command, which will allow them to escape or engage quickly. So here I'll show you as it in action. Boop, he can blink to a different spot. Very similar to like the Mage Blink in World of Warcraft. Of course, it's a Blizzard game as well. So, very neat little unit. Very, very useful. People use them in great numbers in many Protoss games. You'll see tons of Stalkers on the field, and that's kind of their role. So, let's move on to the robotic units. So, we've got the... Well, I'm sorry. Let's continue on the biological units. We've got another unit that's very similar to the Zealot, except it's cloaked, called the Dark Templar. Does a huge amount of damage. Doesn't have as much armor, or has a little bit more shield and armor than the Zealot, but not a whole lot. It's got very little health, so it's actually weaker than the Zealot in that regard. It's also permanently cloaked, which is great early game when there's not a lot of units on the field that can see cloaked units, but they become less and less of a threat as the other player gets cloaked units. So a lot of times you'll see people rush with Dark Templars, try to get the jump on their opponent before they can see cloaked units, or as a late game tactic, but you don't see it as much from a professional player, a Dark Templar usage, except early game. So we'll put them back in here. The next biological unit is the High Templar. And they have multiple abilities. One is feedback, which drains energies from a target. It's good at draining energy out of ghosts and those sort of units that have energy skills that they use. And other Protoss units, really, that build up energy, like sentries. The other thing they do is a spell that's very, very commonly used called Psionic Storm. Does a huge amount of damage to biological units, and I'll show it on these group of Zealots I've got over here. You can look at their health just drop almost by half just on one storm, and if you throw it on a second storm, you almost destroy the entire army. So, very, very powerful. The other thing that a Templar, the 2 Templar, can do is join up to be an Archon. So while he's doing that, let's look at another unit. And I'll talk about the Archon in a minute. Let's look at the Immortal. The Immortal is a powerful robotic unit. And don't be distracted by the Archon, I know he's right there. The Immortal is a strong robotic unit that only can attack ground units. But he's very effective against Marauders from the human side and from the Roaches on the Zergling side. So this is a great staple unit. Many times Protoss will actually mass Immortals and try to rush their enemy with mass Immortals. That's kind of a new thing that's been going on. So Immortals, very critical unit. When a Protoss have 2 or 3 of these, they can almost effectively defend their entire base from any ground attacks without much trouble. So very, very powerful, very, very shielded, and they do a lot of damage as well. So move them back here. The other robotic is the Colossus. Another very powerful unit, and I'll group these 3. There's not very many to show it off, but they can do a lot of damage. They can actually climb up cliffs, so I've got a cliff over here. They can climb up cliffs and get a much better view on the battle, which allows them to actually attack units on the ground without being seen, unless that army has a view up to this area by having a unit up there or an observer. And it's also got an attack that, once upgraded, is one of the farthest ground ranged attacks you can have. And I'll show it to you. That is incredible. Looks like 2 laser beams crossing each other. Does an immense amount of area damage. Very powerful unit. Again, like the Immortal, a lot of times the players will build 4 or 5 of them, and they can almost effectively destroy. You know, they're worth their weight in gold, I guess you could say. So something to keep out for. When a player gets a Colossus, they will protect it with their life because it is a very powerful unit when used correctly. But it can also go down very quickly if not defended. So plus, they look really neat. They remind me of like a tripod from some kind of War of the Worlds or something, which I guess is probably what they were intended to look like. Another unit built from the Robotics Bay is the Warp Prism. And this really simply just allows you to pick up units of your own, and you will see them players do this, and then take them to a location and drop them, allowing you to take your entire army to wherever you want and drop it. The other cool thing it does is it's like a portable pylon, in that you can open it up as a pylon and you can actually warp units to this location. So I can warp a bunch of zealots right in here, right where this is. So it's kind of like a moving teleporter for your units, which is kind of cool. So you'll see that being used a lot. Move him off to the side. The other robotic unit that comes out of the robotics bay is the Observer. And really, the Observer can't attack or defend itself at all. It's got very little hit points, very little health. But it can see a lot of what's going on without being seen because it's cloaked. Now again, like the Dark Templar, once it is discovered, can be destroyed very easily. But until then, it is a great unit that Protoss used to see what is going on in the game. And being able to see what your opponent's doing is very critical. So that is a very useful unit for the Protoss. Another flying unit is the Void Ray. And the Void Ray is an air and a ground attacker. Not very defensive against other air units that are primarily air, like Mutalisks or Vikings, but it is very good against large units. So, for example, if it sees a ground unit like a Colossus that can't attack the air, it is very powerful. And you'll watch. It shoots out a beam that the longer the beam is active, the more damage it does. So the damage increases and increases, and you can see the beam is getting larger and larger and larger.
Annihilation commencing.
So, and it's charged right now, so you'll see a lot of players will charge up their beams by attacking something and then continue to use it. It's very, very lethal enemy if the other player does not stop it. So multiple Void Rays can be a huge threat in a game. The air-to-air unit for the Protoss is the Phoenix, and it is arguably one of the better air-to-air units. It will actually take out a Mutalisk single-handedly, and it is very powerful against the larger flight units. So it's a very good air unit that you'll see Protoss using. It also has the ability to pick units up and then attack the unit. But since it's my own unit, I can't do much with it. So that's kind of nice. Takes the unit out of the battle, that sort of thing. Trying to think what I've got left here. I talked about the Archon. Here's the last unit we're going to talk about. Actually, there's one more unit which I have not built yet, and that is the Mothership. So let me build that while we're talking about this one. So the Archon is an air-to-ground unit by making 2 Templars. It is very expensive, so you don't see a lot of them. But when they're on the field, they are very powerful. They're one of the cheapest, or not cheapest, I'm sorry, one of the more expensive units, but they're also one of the most powerful. And there are very few things that can do a lot of damage to an Archon. So in the end game, the late game, if you have a really long-running game, you will see Archons become one of the primary units in the mix of army for the Protoss, along with the Colossus and the Immortals and powerful units like that. So it does an incredible amount of damage, air and ground, lots and lots of shields, which is nice because even if you take your shields all the way down to 0, they will recharge, allowing them to get back into battle without any other problems. So in a second, I will show you the Mothership, arguably one of the... Actually, I've got one right here. There's the Mothership. Now, the Mothership does one cool thing, and you don't see Motherships a lot in the game, but when you do, they are very, very powerful. For one thing, they cloak every unit that they are around. So they cloak your own units. The enemy can't really see your army to attack it. Makes it very difficult. It's also, of course, heavily armored, heavily shielded. It can do numerous things. It can do... It can load units. It can do a mass recall, like loading all its units to... And here I'll show you. Boom, they're all in the Mothership. So you can actually target units that are a larger distance away and bring them to the Mothership. So you can have your Mothership on one side of the map and teleport all your units to that Mothership immediately. The other thing it does is a vortex, which is great for splitting up an enemy's army. And here's an example of that. Ooh. The famous vortex toilet or Archon toilet is when they throw a bunch of Archons in them and they pop out and do all immense kind of damage. So that's what that does. It lasts a little while, sucks up all those units, and then pops them out. Like I said, it's good for separating armies and that sort of thing. So that's kind of it. That's a summary of the Protoss units. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. I will do some of the other races. Thank you. This is CerealSnax signing out.